@SlittleRock is our Twitter handle. We're also live streaming this. At the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. Make sure that if you have a question during the presentation that you remember to ask it later. So presenting today is Nathaniel Izard of Izard Chocolate. He's going to tell his story. I believe that there are samples for everybody at the end. Okay, let's welcome Nathaniel.
All right, I think I'm on. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, Kim, for inviting me here, and thanks for the guys here at 1 Million Cups for letting me come and speak to y'all. So I just wanted to, as she said, I'm Nathaniel Izard, and so I started Izard Chocolate about 2 years ago, and the way I got into chocolate making, it's kind of an interesting story. I had been working in a completely different field. I worked with a company that represented lighting manufacturers, and so we were sales agents, and I worked in project management and quotations. And so I completely changed. I didn't want to. I knew I was pretty young when I quit that job, and I knew that that wasn't the journey I wanted to take for the rest of my life. So I took some time off and went to Italy for a while and traveled there and enjoyed the food scene there and just the culture. But I knew that when I came back that I was going to start a company. And so I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew I wanted to it was like a bucket list kind of thing. I wanted to start a company and just see what happened. So when I got back, I'm also a hobby guy and I love food. So I started brewing some beer. I started making some cheese, and one of the things on my list was to make chocolate. And so I didn't know much about chocolate at all. I didn't know, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I started Googling, how do you make chocolate? What are the ingredients? Just kind of like you would for any other experiment. And that was when I started. I have no idea what chocolate's made from. I just don't. I started hearing this word cacao, and I was like, "What's cacao?" And so I started doing research, and I got really intrigued by what I found. So what I'm going to do is give you a little brief overview of what I started learning about chocolate and the origins of it, and then I'll kind of talk to you about how we make chocolate at Izard Chocolate. And so I'll come over to this side so that y'all can have that TV. Let's see. Okay. Do I push over here? Yeah, there we go. So this is the cacao tree. And so cacao is the main ingredient in dark chocolate. Cacao has been grown for thousands of years. It's been cultivated for thousands of years. The ancient Mayans and Aztecs, it was a very valuable substance to them. They grew it for they grew it, and what they would do is ferment and dry the seeds, and the seeds were used as currency for them. I mean, they would actually buy different things. So cacao grows. It's native to Central America and kind of the northern part of South America, it was there until about the 18th century when it was transported to Africa. And from Africa, it went to the West Indies, but it only grows in equatorial countries. So it has to be at least in that 20-degree north or south region. So when it went to Africa, that was when it became, they found places where it grew really well in Africa. So now Africa produces about 70, give or take 70% of all the cacao that's used for chocolate making in the world today. So Central America was the native area. That is where you're going to find your more quality cacao. But you can also find some really good cacao from Africa. So getting back, the Aztecs, what they would do, they used it for currency, and the only people that were allowed to eat cacao were royalty. So either royalty or military. They found that cacao was super it would give them lots of energy and keep them going for a long time. So they would actually make these little balls of cacao that they would give their military, and the military would run all day on just a few bites of these balls. So they knew that it was related to the blood, and they believed that it was very rich in nutrients. And so moving forward, we came to America, we discovered cacao. We didn't know much about it until much later, but the first people that started drinking cacao, so it also started out as a drink. It didn't start out as a chocolate bar or a solid. But the first people that started drinking it were the Spanish, and then it went from Spain to Italy, and then France, and then eventually England. So here you see, this is a maid who has, that's a cup full of the chocolate drink. So where do I?
Should be the button on the round side, hit the right.
Yeah, there we go. So even up until the Industrial Revolution, it was still something that only the royalty really could afford. So in the Central America, it was kept back from the common people, but in England or in Europe, it was just really expensive to make it. I mean, it was all handmade, and it had to be transported from the New World. And so the only people that really drank cacao were the royalty. They started creating these drinking houses for chocolate drinking houses that eventually became the tea rooms and the coffee houses that later took over. But also that's where that was the origin of most of the English clubs that you've heard of. So we can go to the next one. That is a plant. So some of these pictures are kind of small, but this is a picture of the Fry chocolate factory in England. And so the English were really the first ones, along with the Swiss, to start producing it in an industrial kind of way. And so this is going back one. That picture before that one. That one there is a picture of the old Hershey factory. And so they also started producing it on an industrial level. So getting into the agriculture, the way cacao is grown, if you were to go to a cacao forest or an orchard, it would look like a rainforest. It wouldn't look planned or, but it actually is. And so they have shade trees, undergrowth, and there's quite a bit of wildlife. But we can go on to, that's a sloth. And we can go on. So this is the cacao fruit here. And so I actually have a cacao fruit. This is an actual dried pod. If y'all want to look at that, and you can pass it around if you want. But you can actually hear the seeds in there. That's a dried pod, but when they're fresh, they look like this. And what they'll do, farmers will harvest the fruit at peak ripeness, and then they'll cut the fruit open. They'll cut that fruit in half and take the fruit and seeds out. And so what they do is they ferment those seeds. And so I think if we go next, so here's a picture of him cutting the fruit off. They cut each pod off one by one, and then you can go on. So they pile them up. Then they have this. They have a device that actually it cuts a ridge at the right length into the pod. So they take so this is what the fruit looks like. So it's kind of an interesting fruit. They actually eat the fruit down there. You can't find it obviously here in the States because it's unless you go to like a really fancy gourmet grocery store somewhere in West or East Coast. But it has a kind of an interesting sweet and yet tart flavor. And then we can go on. So what they do is they put the seeds in these big wooden boxes, and they'll ferment the fruit. So natural fermentation takes over, and alcohol is created. That fruit turns into a liquid, which drains out the bottom of the box. And then they'll take those seeds and they'll put them on these big drying beds. So if you go to the next slide, then they'll put them on these drying beds, and then they'll rake them out. So if you go to the next slide, then they'll rake those seeds for eight times a day, and go back over and just rake them back and forth for 2 weeks to get all the moisture out of those beans. And so this is another way of drying the beans. This one is actually out just in the open, that you can't really see very well, but there's actually a ridge. They have like a canopy that can roll over, say if rain comes, and they can roll the canopy over the beans. So if you go to the next slide, that's when they're dry, when they're to 8% moisture. They do a lot of testing to make sure that the quality is high, that they were dried correctly, they were fermented correctly, and then they'll ship them. They'll put them in big bags, and that's when they come to the U.S. and Europe and other places to be made into chocolate. And so that's where I come in. And so when I first started, I was working out of my kitchen, and I just had little tabletop equipment. I started really just playing around with whatever kind of tools and machinery I could find. But I started roasting in my oven. I started trying to grind it and winnow. I winnowed with a hairdryer, and then I ground it down with, I tried to grind like a blender and a couple different things. I found quickly that none of that works. And so, but I got really interested in it. And so I started buying little kind of homemaker type chocolate making devices, which still don't work very well, but it gave me that ability to keep testing. And so, to make chocolate on a real level, it goes through quite a few steps. I mean, anywhere from, some companies will list out every tiny little step, and you can get up into 70 different steps. But technically, there's like about 20 main steps that chocolate goes through, and to go from cacao seeds, and which I actually brought cacao here. We don't have to pass it around, but if y'all want to look at it later, these are actually cacao seeds that I brought, that y'all can look at. But that's what I get in the bags. And so what it goes through is it goes through a process. I think if we go on to the next slide. Then so that's like a bag. That's what my bags look like when they come in. One note real quick is that there's kind of two main sectors for chocolate makers. You have high quality, fine flavor chocolate, and then you have your mass produced chocolate. And so mass produced chocolate, cacao is traded on a blanket price, like coffee and other commodities are traded. And that's kind of regardless of what the quality of the cacao is. It's just, it's $1.50 today, it's $1.52 tomorrow. And big companies, big brokers will buy that cacao and they'll ship it to, a lot of these manufacturers will hire brokers to buy the cacao and then have it shipped to a warehouse, and then it's shipped to the manufacturer eventually. Apart from that, kind of this completely different world is the fine flavor, high quality cacao market. And a lot of times, kind of like you may have seen with coffee, a lot of these farmers that are growing really high quality cacao, they spend a lot of extra time and they're putting a lot of effort into growing that cacao. And so the prices you get for commodity cacao can't support all that work. And there's a much smaller number of chocolate makers that are looking for that fine flavor, high quality. And they have over several hundred years established trade agreements with these particular regions or farms to buy that cacao at completely different price levels than the commodity. And so when I buy cacao, I buy from specific people who have names, and the prices that we pay are anywhere from 3 to 4 times what even fair trade standards set. but we at least pay up to or above or beyond the fair trade standards, and then oftentimes quite a bit more. But that's not even really what we're worried about, because we're not looking at, these people are not charging us based on we have to make at least this much. We're looking at, we want to buy this quality, and so that price is not so much the issue. So these particular beans come from a country, Belize, and they're also organic. But if you want to go on to the next slide, this is when they first come in, we sort through the beans, and then we roast the beans in this machine here. And this machine was actually built. So I went from kitchen equipment to deciding, okay, I'm actually going to make this a thing. I'm going to actually start producing chocolate. And so I invested quite a bit into buying machinery that's actually built for producing chocolate. So this machine here was built for me, and it's a cacao roaster. It'll roast 12 pounds of cacao every 15 minutes. And so we are able to monitor the temperature, the heat, the level of airflow, a lot of different things that go into producing a good quality roast. And so if you go on to the next, what happens next is that after the beans have been roasted, they need to be deshelled. So there's a little shell on those beans. And so what we do is we have a machine called a winnower, and that machine crushes the beans and then separates the shells from the nibs. And I actually built that machine myself. But what it does is it uses airflow to suck the shells up, and then the beans go through a tube. The nibs that are heavier go through a tube down into a bucket. And we recycle our shells. We give them to, in fact, I think we have a bag at our shop. If you want to come by and put chocolate smelling mulch in your garden, you're more than welcome to. So what we do is we take the nibs and grind those down. So if you go to the next slide, this here is what we call a melanger. And so there's two granite stones that are grinding, that are resting on top of a granite stone on the bottom. And so what happens is that that last picture, there were two ingredients on there. There were three things on there, but there's only two ingredients. There was cacao nibs and then sugar. And so when you grind cacao down, kind of like when you grind peanut butter or peanuts, it turns into peanut butter and becomes kind of a paste. The same thing happens with cacao. There's natural fat in the cacao, which when the solid molecules get smaller, they're able to flow with the fat. And so the whole mixture heats up and it produces the liquid. And then we add sugar to that to grind that up as well. And so if you go on to the next one, once it's ground, then we block it up and we age it in block form for anywhere to like 3 to 5 weeks. And so that aging process just helps mellow out the chocolate. And we found that does help the overall flavor of the cacao, or of the chocolate. So then it goes through a machine that actually it melts the chocolate back down. After it's in the block form, we break up the blocks, we put them in this machine, and then this machine it does a process called tempering. And so tempering the fat in the chocolate, it takes on many different molecular structures, and there's only one or two that we are actually interested in creating. And the way to get that molecular structure is through a process called tempering, where you actually are doing the tempering you're heating and cooling that chocolate to create that particular molecular structure. And so the chocolate goes in the bottom of the machine, and then it circulates up to the top, and then comes out in kind of like a stream. And then we're able to put our molds in that stream. Yeah, and you can go on to the next one. Once the chocolate goes into the molds, then it comes. Then we'll cool the molds down, and then we'll knock the chocolate out of the molds, and that's how we have our chocolate bars. And then I think the next one, we hand wrap all of our bars in gold foil, and then we wrap them in decorative paper. We get our paper from This paper here is from Italy, and then we have some from California, and then some from the UK. But we change different papers, but we like to find high quality papers that are sustainable, and then that look cool. So, and then we label them, and then that's it. So I'll finish that's kind of the end of my talk. But if you all have questions and anything, then I'd be happy to see what I can do. And we also have chocolate samples. So I don't know what we want to do. We could just pass them around, or people could go around.
Are
And
they different, or are they the
they
same?
are different, yeah. So one of them has little white specks on it, and that is Icelandic sea salt. And then there's one that doesn't, and so that's a single origin plain dark chocolate. So y'all could try one of each. Each chocolate is actually from a different region, and so the one without white specks on it is from Dominican Republic, and the other one's from Belize. The Dominican Republic chocolate has notes of raspberry and some interesting like blackberry and plum notes. The cherry, or the one with specks on it, the salt, that one has more of a deeper chocolatey with some note with some cherry notes to it. So those are fun to try next to each other because you actually can taste the difference in the cacao region, and that's why we do single origin chocolate.
Okay, make sure that you say your name and where you're from and use the microphone because we're live streaming.
Thanks. Carol Ansley Bodge from the Venture Center. Nathaniel, I'm a chocoholic, but I want to ask your perspective of why the European method of making chocolate has always been so very different from the traditional American method of making chocolate.
Yeah, well, I think it does. Well, I really think that a lot of it has to do with each particular manufacturer, and I do think you do have. It also depends on what that region, what their tastes are used to. So you can have Europe. I guess what you're probably asking is Europe is kind of known for more high quality chocolate, and America is not known for the high quality chocolate. That is actually changing now, but I think in the past, America has not had a lot of chocolate makers. Hershey was the biggest company, and they've been selling chocolate for over 100 years now. And they've done a great job of marketing very sweet chocolate. It's not bad. It's just not. There's not a lot of rich chocolate flavor there. And really, in the 1920s, then a lot of the bigger companies bought up any of the small guys that were left. So there were some artisan, high quality craft chocolate guys who were making some great chocolate, and they all got bought up in the 20s. So America has really been kind of devoid of any good smaller guys who are willing to do that. When you get to mass producing chocolate on a huge level, like a plant like Hershey's or Cargill or a company like that does, it's hard you can't monitor the quality. And quality cacao, what I was telling you about the difference between quality cacao and commodity, quality cacao makes up about 7 to 8% of that complete harvest every year. So it's on a mass level, you just can't, it's still a lot of cacao, but there's not enough to go around for. So there's a lot of much older European chocolate makers who've been doing high quality chocolate, and they've been able to survive kind of the ups and downs of the market and the industrial market. And they've been able to, there's just more, I think in Europe, there are certain areas where the palates are just more defined, and they're more willing to pay more money for that chocolate. I think it's changing though. In the last 12 years, about 12 years ago, there were two small batch chocolate makers in the U.S., and now there are over 70. So it's a growing market. It's still very small, and it makes up a very small percentage of any other part of the market. But it's growing. I think people are definitely into the whole idea of they're willing to pay more for either local or high quality chocolate. So.
I'm Eric Francis. I'm a local communications consultant, and I'm interested in the business side of your operation. What have been some of your big hurdles from a business point of view, and as a small manufacturer, how do you meet those hurdles, and what are you looking towards as far as potential growth?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. I think when I first started the company, I had never started a company before. I had no background in business accounting. I had no background in marketing or sales. I did have some background in sales, but so I was really, and chocolate making was completely new to me as well. So I kind of made it hard on myself on the front end as far as just the first year of starting the company. I actually didn't have any product to sell. I was just working on product development. I wanted to produce something that tasted really well, and I wanted it to be the kind of thing that could market itself. I wanted it to be the kind of thing that people buy it and they go, "Oh wow, that's amazing! I really like that. Let me tell all my friends." And so that took a long time to get to where I was happy with a product. And then when I started selling the product, then that kind of entered a whole new ballgame of presenting a product that consumers understand and buy and are willing. So I've been mainly working on a direct level with consumers and just kind of getting their feedback, understanding what they want and what they kind of tend towards and stuff. So that's been an interesting thing. But I'd say as far as challenges, the funding for starting a company like this, I had significant savings that I put into this, and then I borrowed some money. But it takes a lot of money to start a manufacturing process. And one of my main key issues that I learned from was inventory, just having a large amount of inventory on hand, which takes up a lot of cash. So I would say that was one of my biggest hurdles when starting the company, was just learning that lesson.
Do we have any more questions? No? Okay, so we end all 1 million cups the same way, which is by asking our presenter, what is one thing we can do to help them?
Yeah, and he also asked what I was going to be doing in the future. What we're doing within the next or this year, one of our goals is to continue to grow our retail side. So what we do is we wholesale our products to retailers, so we're trying to grow that business because that's kind of the lifeblood of making chocolate on any level. And so if you have and to answer her question, if you have a shop or a company that you really like, that you think the chocolate could go well in, then you can either let me know, or you can talk to the owner of that company and tell them that you'd love to see Izard chocolate on the shelves. So, but thanks again for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for coming. We, I think, still have coffee. Yes. And let's see. Do y'all have any announcements?
Next week is
I might let you. I don't know about that. Okay. Do you have?
Sure. Okay.
And you can co-work in here, can't you, today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to stay with us and co-work some today, you can do so directly behind this partition right here. There's a circle of desks all set up, and of course our Wi-Fi password is posted in several places, but if you need that, you can contact me. Next week, Million Cups will be Hub X. So that's the new medical accelerator that's being done by our friends at the Hub across the river, and they're going to come in and talk about what they're doing and all the great things that are going to come out of that accelerator. So that's it for me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And if y'all have any questions, all three of the organizers right here, feel free to come talk to us. Like I said,